Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back at the World AI Show. Artificial Intelligence in Medicine, the Data Ethics Challenge is the next topic. We're looking at talking about watchdog policies for inclusive, open, non-executable, and democratic digital development, the current state and challenges at the macro ethics ecosystem level, and also the promise of blockchain technology, the semantic web, and the way forward to trust by design. For this, we're joined by Dimitris, who's a senior advisory consultant, digital health, digital government reform, and digital health and innovation expert at the World Health Organization, London. Dimitris is a key expert in the global health innovation, governance, and transformational growth, focusing on value-based care and enabling transitional and learning health ecosystems. He's somebody who's had significant global experience advising on AI deployment, data ethics, and tech-driven policy. Well, with this, I'd like to humbly welcome on the stage and screen Dimitris. Dimitris, thank you for joining us. With this, we'd request you to turn on your camera and join us live. Thank you for your time. How are you doing today?
Very well. How are you? Good morning. Good afternoon to everyone. MC, thank you.
Great to have you, Dimitris. So we're looking forward to, of course, a wonderful session from your end at the World AI Show, Singapore. So the stage and screen is all yours. Over to you now.
Thank you. Let me share my screen.
Sure.
Well, that sounded very long, your introduction. I'm going to try to keep it not that complicated. And I promise I will do my best to prepare the grounds for a very interesting conversation later on. Can you let me?
Yes, I'll acknowledge once. Yeah, just in the presentation.
Good.
And we're good to
Thank
go.
you.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, everything's okay now, is it?
Yes, it's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, MC. Thanks very much. So good morning and good afternoon again to everyone, depending where you're joining us from. What I want to talk today about in a very short period of time is artificial intelligence in medicine. I'm going to try to keep it as much as possible away from the medical field because there are people from different angles joining us today. And I will focus on the data ethics challenge perspective. I'm going to skip my background because I think that has been covered already. Now, let's have a look very quickly at some basic terms. Artificial intelligence is, we all know that, the most talked about digital innovation platform nowadays and during the COVID pandemic. Now that works within the digital health environment, which is now, by contrast to previous periods in time, the sum of ideas and goods that produce innovation in health. That included in that innovation in health is quality, efficacy, safety, and outcomes from health services, ensuring equitable access and universal coverage. Now, what this means, definition means, is that if we don't have those results, then there's no point in talking about digital health. Now, within that environment, we have two forms of innovation: sustaining innovation, disruptive innovation. The former is improving existing processes and practices, and disruptive innovation is fueling gradual and wide adoption of new business models and radical changes in the environment. Now, most people actually talk about the second type of innovation, but you'll be surprised in careful analysis, a lot of innovative ideas out there that we're very well aware of. Uber, for example, the shared ride service is not really a disruptive innovation. Now, the challenges in innovation are scaling, ethics, adoption of standards, compliance with regulatory environment, complexity, and interdependence, because an opportunity that creates opportunities for others is the model that we need for innovation nowadays, for the reasons I'm going to describe later on. Now, as far as the innovation ecosystem is concerned, the term refers to a biological of interacting organisms and the physical environment. That is the case for any kind of ecosystem. And its virtual reality version, which is the interesting part, or metaverse as it's called, the ecosystem exposes a complex and connected nature of innovation. And as COVID-19 showed, the need for trust, regulation, meta-organization, synergy, interoperability, solidarity, and diplomacy, as we are really talking about an international state. Without these principles, innovation in health cannot foster or be sustainable. And connecting the system of innovations is data with condition of regulated and uninterrupted flow. Now, there we go. During COVID-19, the health ecosystem came under considerable and unprecedented pressure for innovation. We all know that there's so much innovation out there. There's papers and discussions and presentations. Now, what I want to focus on is what is under this explosion in the pandemic, which has caused an explosive proliferation of innovation activity, not necessarily a success. The pandemic I'm referring to. In the US, just a couple of figures just to indicate what I'm talking about. In the US, startups in digital health raised during the first 6 months of 2021 up to 15 billion in financing, more than the entire 2020 financing. This, while McKinsey report indicates that 95% of value in German startups is produced after Series C financing. So what's happening during the first rounds of financing is complexity and ecosystem difficulties, which means that the ecosystem clearly reacts. Now, let's have a look at what this reaction we're referring to looks like. You may have heard, or probably heard of Ask Delphi, the research program that imitates ethical values. Now, Ask Delphi goes into Reddit dialogues of people, and then it tries to find out if dialogue is, it gets trained and starts answering ethical questions, providing answers on ethics. Now, one of the questions that Delphi was asked, very, very interesting, is shooting random people with blow darts filled with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine in order to end the pandemic. Now, clearly, Johnson & Johnson was selected here not to advertise the particular company, far from it, but because it was a single dose vaccine, and otherwise there would be no logic because the system would dwell into whether a second dose is required and so forth. The answer was it's acceptable. So we have a little bit of a problem there because that's logical, perhaps, but definitely not ethical. Now, people warn that out of all this current state, the situation, there's an anticipated implosion, and brain health experts, in fact, which is a very typical domain for very intense domain for digital health and AI, that experts warn that ballooning valuations often contradict the underlying fundamental problems companies face. This hype would distract from deeper issues faced by numerous companies, and some even deem the field as a lawless Wild West, citing concerns about false claims regarding benefits and poor data privacy practices. Now here, we have the concern of a disconnect between commercially successful apps and those that have been clinically validated. It doesn't mean that we have a problem with this situation, but something needs to be fixed and bridged, because then we'll have consumers and clinicians to differentiate technologies that work from hype, and this is already causing reaction. Let's have a look at, before I go on to expose, in my opinion, what is the problem with the ecosystem is the connected innovation dynamics. So we have the innovator's viewpoint, a great diagram I picked up in a research paper. The reference is at the bottom, if anyone is interested in that research paper thesis. The innovator's viewpoint and two different types of innovation dynamics, the disruption on the one side and sustainability or sustaining innovation on the other side. So we have, from the innovator's viewpoint, a product or service, which is AI in this case, a business model and a platform. Let's have a look at Apple and Apple apps, for example. Apple was, the Apple phone was the sustaining innovation. It improved a lot of things about mobile telephony, and then the applications on the Apple platform were the ones that caused the disruption in internet access. So this is the business model and the platform to create disruption. And then all these functions within the ecosystem with actors, clinical processes, impact data, and data is the connecting tissue between all these components. Now, what is the current state in our ecosystem and what is the challenge we're facing? The current state is that we're looking at that picture of the Earth with a lot of space debris. And this is the same with our data, because what we're actually doing, at least in the medical field, is we're recording of limited use and meaning pieces of clinical information produced in laboratory innovation. So the patient leaves behind traces of data while being treated and monitored for their health and supported for their health. And we are producing then using the data laboratory innovation, which means that sooner or later that innovation might actually collapse because that innovation is in complete lack of harmony with the ecosystem. Now, the same perspective at the high level or low level, in fact, it's called the macroethics challenge. The ecosystem challenge causes macroethics challenge, and then which leads the ethics challenge itself, AI challenges. Data has a very short lifespan, meaning the aim is to extend the useful life of data beyond a singular care environment or a singular innovation. And how do we do that? By safeguarding the temporal clinical semantics of data as a patient-centric standard for care systems. So we need to make sure that data means something down the road and forever, if possible. Thus, we are also protecting the entire ecosystem of health and that of AI and other innovations. Look at this diagram showing the impact of the ecosystem on ML. There's a study that shows, one of the studies here, the amount of time that certain projects took to develop ML. 85% of the time is curation, data curation, 15% of the time is innovation. Well, if I was financing a project like that, I would have some difficulty to be convinced this is a lucrative investment. Now, what is the journey up until now? Until COVID-19, everyone in the field knows data sharing was very limited. When it took place, not complex. So then EU's GDPR came and other countries developed their own frameworks. But this is about basic consent management. So it doesn't do much beyond that. Inadequate policies exist. In the EU, for example, different countries have different policies. Some of them protect less, some of them protect more. And we are based on unreliable processes, which often downgrade valuable digital assets to junk rating. Well, it happens quite often, and we know that. So what do we need? We need policies for open, democratic, inclusive, and non-excludable digital development, regardless who's paying. Technological mechanisms to protect data in its entire innovation ecosystem spectrum, trust chains, for example, regardless of the technology, decentralized self-sovereign identifiers and self-agency. Now, we all have a technology in mind that does this, but it doesn't mean that this is the technology to use. We need enterprising policies that further promote trust in markets and circularity in the economy on the basis of connected and sustainable innovation, the pyramid of governance, regulation, and legislation. And finally, all this leads to longer product life cycles. No orphan data, longitudinal data in health, reliable data, temporal information reuse. I'm quite sure that this is very important quality of data in any field, more or less, including banking or other fields. Now, let's have a look at the blockchain paradigm. It safeguards reliability and the context with provenance and diagnostic temporal context with immutability. So lots of people connect to provide care. Their contributions are immutable and provenance is guaranteed. We know who provided what and who added what data were. And this enables trust and promotes co-production, for example, through digital fingerprints. We know the set of healthcare providers that are responsible for a certain part of the blockchain of data. The principle here is to extend trust services towards a distributed and semantically federated blockchain of health data, including collective digital fingerprinting. Now, this moves away from what traditional record perspective of hospitals or healthcare providers and recording the data and trying to actually share data in impossible manners. The idea is my data, my management, my integration, and my trust. Now, what are the benefits of this approach? No more orphan data, no more space junk. We can accelerate research in and with clinical trials versus curated clinical trials with reliable and readily available real-world data. Look at Israel, for example, and what it did globally with its data as a country. First, to provide the collaboration and clinical innovation with shared data spaces, accelerate the integration of precision medicine and other precision fields, facilitate and support translational research, enable learning systems in health, enable comorbidity, which was a huge thing missing from COVID-19 management, and response, transform international development from pilotitis to transformational strategy. And this is my very specific field and very important thing to do. So the message here is we need to start building circular economies in digital platforms, in digital economy, and in digital innovation of particular importance in the medical field. Now, a circular digital economy is a growth model that emphasizes the extension of the product life cycle. And this is extremely important in the health field, in research and clinical medicine. The reduction of the carbon footprint of digital development. Imagine we have an estimation of 25% of digital of carbon footprint coming from digital development. And according to 2030 target of reducing 30% of this, with our digital development, we can come very close to our target. The reuse of services is part of the growth model, and goods such as data, software infrastructure, and the transfer of know-how. You do it once, hopefully you don't need to do it every single time. Now, in health, this ecosystem is based on the extension of the semantic life of data, which is currently deregulated. This is the silo phenomenon, and I am also convinced it happens in a lot of other industries. Now, today, the footprint we observe is unacceptably large. According to one study, this is 85% of waste, which is not exactly an investment opportunity, the study I showed you earlier. So finally, this is the proper view, what we should be looking at instead of space debris. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dimitris, for that wonderful presentation.